And so it's best to get ready. Also, I told you last week we need to go ahead and start firming up some more information about our adult mission trip to Barbuda this year. Some of our upper high school will be coming with us as well. And so if it's something you are interested in, it doesn't lock you into anything, but I need a pretty decent head count to start working through the numbers, because that's only 3 or 4 months away as well. And so I've already started working with Bonnie's team to go ahead and get our information. And so I hope to have something for you Sunday. If not, I can give you an estimate based on what we've seen in the past. But she's running numbers for us as we speak. And that'll give you a project or something to project toward as you raise money as we get ready for another trip. And a lot's going on in Ireland. If you don't follow them on social media, you'll see that they've been doing the dental clinic. They finally got that up and running for a couple of years. We've been working on getting part of the hospital renovated, so there's a dental clinic. They were able to get the last pieces in there in the last year, early this year, and they actually ran a dental clinic for a week. This is the first time the people on island were able to get dental work while on island, and they didn't have to cross over to the mainland to get work like that. And now they have Project Cure. You've heard it talked about before, but a big container they put together with a lot of medical supplies to actually outfit the hospital with the things they need. They've been unloading, setting that up, and so we're hoping here shortly to see things like births on the island. They had no maternity ward, no maternity equipment, but we saw them unloading from the Project Cure container a maternity bed for the birthing ward. So a lot of change happening on the island for the good. And so we just are excited to see what projects wait for us in October to be a part of that. So if you're interested, even if you don't know, I don't know if I'll be able to raise enough money, or I don't know if I'll have the time, still come next Sunday, hear what we have to say, and then we can start putting together a more accurate head count from that. That's all I've got for now. Actually, no, it's not. This is unscripted, but God just put it in my head. Tasha, can I talk about it? What you told us at staff? 6 total? 7. Y'all, last Sunday, while second service was going on, God was working in our kids' ministry, and we have 7 young people who have come forward to say they want to be baptized. And we usually wait till September to take care of that and do a church-wide, but we say, hey, in Acts, Philip said, why do we need to wait when he's on the Ethiopian unit? The Ethiopian unit said, well, there's water, let's do it now. So we're going to do that, so we're working with the parents, and once we get some times together, we're going to go ahead and get these kids baptized. So, y'all, God is moving, God is working, God is great, and I couldn't let that one go. Y'all need to know that as well, because I'm excited about when I see stuff like that. All right, let's go ahead and dive into today's topic. We continue in Hebrews chapter 11. Okay, some of you paid attention last week. You still missed it. Let's try it again. Hebrews chapter 11. We've been here a while, and I think we have some time yet to spend here. And what we're seeing is we've spent some time in the book of Hebrews, but when we got to chapter 11, we felt God say, hey, pump the brakes, slow it down. There is a lot to unpack here, and so we've been doing that, and so today is no different. But before we get to Hebrews 11, let me talk to you a little bit about my fear of heights. I'm not a fan of heights, but I have gotten a lot better than I used to be. In fact, it was one of the main reasons as a kid I was terrified of roller coasters. I've told you before that when I was a young lad, my parents took us, my family, to Six Flags over Georgia. If you've ever been there, they got some awesome rides. And I missed out. I rode one ride, thought I was going to die, and I said, I've done my part. I will not ride anymore. And so I wasted a whole day's ticket. And if you've ever paid a theme park ticket, you know it's not cheap, and you know that if you're over the age of 1 month old, they basically charge you for being an adult. So my parents had to watch that money just float away as I sat on the bench and watched them ride after ride. I was terrified mainly because of the heights. But let's talk about roller coasters for a minute. If you're not a fan of it, this is how you probably think about it. These jokers not only are tempting death at every twist and turn and flip they put you on, but they do it at insane heights at the same time. For instance, let me just put it this way, and I'm not knocking on them, but you'll see in a minute. But for most of us who are fans of theme parks, we would consider Carowinds to be kind of a joke. At least for a while it was. It wasn't anything to write home about. It's just what was in our backyard. Because when you have places like Six Flags in Cedar Point, Ohio, Universal Studios, Disney World, things like that, Carowinds kind of fall short when you try to compare them to some of the mega parks of the world. But over the years, they have improved. In fact, one of the most famous rides in North America is here in our own backyard. It is the Fury, more specifically the Fury 325. The reason it's called the Fury 325, can anybody guess it? What's the 325 stand for? Darren, don't say anything. The first hill is 325 feet high. 325 feet high in the air. I don't know if you realize how big that is. Let me help you draw a mind picture. The Statue of Liberty, if you don't include its pedestal, just the green part, the copper that aged green, the Statue of Liberty by itself is about 151 feet tall. That puts this ride over 2 times the height of the Statue of Liberty. In fact, the Statue of Liberty with the pedestal is only 305 feet tall, which puts the Fury 325 in our own backyard 20 feet taller than the tip of the torch on the Statue of Liberty. This thing is a monster. I love it. Love it. Love it. In fact, I'm jealous of one of our congregation who got to ride it 15 times in a row to the point he had to take pain medicine because he was giving himself a headache. He rode it so much. I'm not going to call you out, Darren. It's okay. Your secret's safe with me. But kid me would have rather had their teeth pulled than to attempt what I would have thought was a death trap. But as I got older, I got over my fear of heights a little bit because I started doing some extreme sports. I loved motocross. I loved skateboarding, snowboarding, things like that. And one of the things my buddies and I got into was rock climbing. Now, I never did it in the wild, if you will, where you just see a rock face and climb up a mountain. I wasn't quite that good at it, but we had some climbing gyms we would attend over the years. If you've never been to one, it's just a big indoor playground for adults where there's just walls of handholds and grips of different sizes and shapes to help you practice your technique and your grip. And so we did that. But at first I'm like, oh, it's a really high wall, but the spirit of competition got to me. I'm an upper high schooler now. My manhood's on the line. My buddies are climbing this wall. I can't be the wimp on the bottom. So I get my turn and I start climbing the wall. And I realize one step at a time, I'm able to climb this wall. Hey guys, this isn't a big deal, right? But here's the problem. Here's the issue. What goes up must go down. When you get to the top of the wall, oh no, now what? If you've never participated in any type of rock climbing, let me just spell it out for you. In order to get properly and safely back to the ground, you have to do something called rappelling. Well, that doesn't sound too bad, right? Let me explain it to you. You gotta let go. You have to let go of the wall. You're hanging on for dear life. You've made it. You're sweating. You ever get the nervous sweats where you feel it in the creases of your fingers? Yeah, if you're not a big fan of heights and you're at the top of the wall, you're like, whew, I made it. And that adrenaline's pumping. You're kind of shaking a little bit. Your knees feel a little weak and shaky. Your hands are sweating. And then you look down and you're like, I got to get back down, right? You got to let go. All you have is a safety harness and what they call a belay rope. It's a little safety rope that they use to lower you back down, which means you have to give up control. You have to trust in an automated system like most gyms have. So this automated belay system that slowly pulls up the rope as you climb and then lets it out slowly as you release, that and a safety harness is all that's keeping you from falling down and hitting concrete. And most climbing walls are somewhere between 20 and 50 feet high. That's intimidating. And here's the worst part. There are some gyms that don't have automated systems. So they train your buddy to be your belayer. And so you're like, this is the joker that I tricked into eating hot sauce and chocolate dipped in some 6-week-old yogurt until he puked all day. And now that's the guy who's I'm trusting my life to? Yeah. If you actually have someone belaying, they have a special harness on them. And they're the ones that pull the rope as you climb. And then when it's time to let you go, they let it back out. And so now you're not only trusting your life to your safety equipment, you're trusting it to your buddy. And so you have to let go. It's kind of like when we went whitewater rafting one time. The guide pulled us over to the side with some of the other rafts, and they said, hey, look, we have a cliff jump. If you want to participate, a lot of people like it. The water's really deep. It's refreshing. You've been in the heat all summer just paddling. Take a dip, jump off the rock. The problem is, they said, if you decide this is what you're going to do and you climb up with us, there's a path to get up there, you have to jump. You can't climb back down. It's not safe. The same with the rock wall. It's not safe to try to climb back down. You need to trust your equipment. In fact, they said, if you won't jump off the cliff, we will throw you off because we have an obligation, because we cannot let you climb down. It's not safe. And so here you are. The same principle applies in a climbing gym. You can't just try to climb your way down. You have to let go. And so you release the wall and lean back, and that's the hardest part. You got to lean back into it for it to activate. But then you realize it does work. And when you learn to actually trust the system, not only do you find freedom because it does provide safety, but you can actually make a little fun out of it. I probably couldn't do it now, but back in the day, I did the Spider-Man. That's where you flip all the way over backwards, put your feet in the air, grab the rope like that, and then lower yourself like Spider-Man does. That's a blast. A little bit of a head rush. Maybe that's what was causing it. But it's because you learn to trust something outside of your control. And this is something we've talked on numerous times in our walk through the topic of faith, that we have to, as part of faith, release control back to God. We saw it with Abraham and Isaac. Abraham had to release something he loved. He had to trust God with this thing, and so that it wouldn't become an idol. And so today we ask, what about you? What is it that you're trying to hang on to? It's decisions you're trying to make for your own life, and you're not willing to let go of control and trust it to God. Last week we looked at a single verse from Hebrews chapter 11, and we're going to do the same today. But when you trace through the life of the person who is mentioned here in Hebrews, you will start to understand why the writer of Hebrews makes a mention of them. So without further ado, let's look at this week's focus scripture. So if you're following along, it's Hebrews chapter 11, verse 21. As we mentioned last week, often the Bible refers to God as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and who? Jacob. And today we look at his story. So let's look at Hebrews 11, verse 21. It says, it was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. Okay, that's it? Yeah. Seems almost cryptic, but once again, remember, the audience for this book is the Hebrew people, and the Hebrew people would have been very familiar with the story of their ancestor, Jacob. And so when the writer of Hebrews mentions this snapshot from a moment near the end of Jacob's life, the intended audience would have been able to draw to memory the story of Jacob and make the connection. And so what we're seeing here is, toward the end of his life, Hebrews 11:21 tells us that Jacob, as an old man, is blessing his grandsons. And it's a very similar wording to what we saw last week when Isaac blessed his own sons. But if you remember from last week, that blessing was important because not only was it passing down a word of faith to your kids and speaking a blessing over them, but it was also passing down the promise that had been first given to Abraham, which he then passed to his son Isaac, and now Isaac passed to Jacob, and now Jacob was passing to his offspring. You see, each of these men had in turn, through the journey of their lives, come to terms with what it means to surrender to God. Because first we saw Abraham, he had to walk away from everything into the unknown. Then he had to trust that a promise would come about after decades and decades of waiting. And then when finally the promise does come, he is asked to give that promise back to God, his son. Then after that, that promised son Isaac now inherits the promise given to Abraham. But he doesn't get to see it come to fruition. He doesn't see his offspring become a great nation. He doesn't see them dwelling in and owning the land God promised them. And so just like his father, he lives as a nomad with no place to call home. And he has to go through hardships if you study his life because he was a foreigner in a strange land. But then as he draws his life to a close, he passes on that blessing and his promise to his son after he's endured so much. Basically, Isaac acted as a torchbearer, and he passed the promised torch to his son Jacob, and that's what brings us to Jacob today. Like I said, we're having to make this connection because it's not our history typically, but the Hebrew people would have automatically made this connection. But for our own sake, let's kind of walk through this, because names back then really had meaning. We've talked about that before. And Jacob's name meant heel grabber, which could be considered deceiver, schemer. And we'll find in just a moment that his life actually lived up to his namesake. And so the reason we need to study it is that we have to ask ourselves, how is someone who is known as a deceiver, a schemer, a heel grabber, if you will, how is he a person who gets a spot in the Hall of Faith? Then we jumped ahead a few weeks ago when Desmond taught, and we looked at Samson, so you know that people with wild histories can still have a place in the Hall of Faith. So let's discover how that works out for Jacob. Because remember, God in the Old Testament and in parts of the New Testament is referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So not only is Jacob here in the Hall of Faith, but he is listed in that great list of the patriarchs. So let's look at his life story, and I'm going to kind of break it down for you, and I'll just walk you through it. So Isaac, when he was 40, was given his wife Rebekah, and they were married. But here's a problem. So you got to remember, let's go think back to where we started. Abraham and Sarah were barren. They didn't have kids. That was part of the promise. They were well past the age of having kids, and God said, you're going to have descendants, and those two things don't align. And so they waited, but God gave them a son in their extreme old age. I think Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born. And so now Isaac is carrying the blessing. God told Abraham, your descendants will make a great nation. So that means there has to be a family tree with branches. And now Isaac's the next step. He and his wife are now struggling with infertility as well. It actually is in the book of Genesis if you study their life. And so what does Isaac do? Well, he goes to God and prays. He's like, God, you said this was a promise to pass through our family line. It's not good a promise if it dies on step one. And so God's like, don't worry. And so Rebekah eventually does conceive, and she feels something's crazy going on inside there. This was before the time of ultrasounds. You couldn't 3D image your way through a child's face. And so she's like, there's a lot of activity going on. Let me see what's happening. And so it says she goes before the Lord. And what is revealed to her is that there are two warring nations inside of her. I heard one pastor say it this way, ladies, in the late stages of your pregnancy, did you ever feel like you were carrying a country in there? Yeah. Well, Rebekah had two. And so when she heard two warring nations, she's like, that makes sense. In fact, I want to show you what the Lord told her, because it's going to play out as we walk through the story of Jacob. Genesis 25, verse 23, it says, and the Lord told her, the sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. So here they are in the womb, already duking it out. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. So here from the womb, we get a prediction that the older is going to serve the younger. Now, it may not seem like a big deal to us, but here, let me explain this. Back then, inheritance was a major deal, and that's not how inheritance worked. The carrier of the family name, the one who got the majority of the family wealth, who carried the legacy that had been passed on from father to son and so on, was the firstborn son, the older of the two. But here it is, God's flipping it on his head. He said, actually, the older is going to serve the younger. Now remember that's a prophecy. We'll get back to it. So when the time comes, Rebekah gives birth, and the first kid to pop out is red and hairy. And so they name him Hairy Red Dude. No joke, that's his name. Esau means hairy, it means red, it means hairy red dude. And that's why he got his name. But here's the crazy part. And one pastor said, don't think too much of it because it might get confusing. But on the heels, literally, of the birth of the first son was a little hand. Jacob was grabbing on to the heel of his brother, trying to wrestle him like, oh no, not without me, you're not. And it literally says Jacob was born right after grabbing the heel of his brother, and that's where he got his name, heel grabber. And little did they know he would live up to that name. But when we look at their lives as they grow up, we find that these two boys, though twins, grew up to be two totally different people with two totally different personalities. In fact, let me read it to you. Genesis 25 now in verse 27. It says, as the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. That's my boy. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. The best way to describe it is this. If you were to describe Esau into today's terms, you would call him a man's man. He's an outdoorsman. He's hunted. He cooked the wild game he harvested. He's as hairy as a goat, and that's a literal thing. We'll see that in a minute. In fact, he even smelled like one. Basically, I heard one person telling the story put it this way. If he was a modern man, he'd probably chew Red Man, drive a Chevy or a GMC, have a couple of hunting dogs in the back, and just live outside as much as he could. And the exact polar opposite was his brother Jacob, who's described as having a quiet temperament, as the guy who loves to chill at the house. Look, anybody here, it's okay to admit it, we're not casting judgment, you're the Esau. You're outdoorsy, you're restless, you want to go outside. Okay, no one wants to admit, who's the Jacob? Okay, if you're not going to admit Esau, then we're not going to get anybody admitting Jacob. Okay, well, let me tell you about who I am. Depending on the day, I'm a little bit of both. There's plenty of times I want to be out hunting. I want to go out fishing. In fact, I'm wearing one of my shirts I wear when we go offshore fishing. Y'all, I'm a little nuts. We watched Jaws the other day. I'd never seen it, and I know it's crazy. But it was the 50th anniversary, and I watched Jaws, and most people are terrified. You know what I want to do? I was like, man, I can't wait to go fishing again. Because, like half the movie is them trying to fish the shark up. And I'm like, dude, I want to be there and do that. That looks awesome. So, yeah, part of me likes to be outside. I like to fish and hunt. And, the dude's trying to hold in his lunch, throwing out the chum in Jaws, if you remember. My wife was like, oh, that's so disgusting. I was like, actually, I kind of like the way that smells. I know it's weird. I don't want to wear it as a cologne. But when I'm in this situation, it tells me, yeah, we're really fishing now. But on the flip side, like I said, depending on the day, sometimes I just want to chill. I want to watch some TV. I want to turn on some Netflix and just binge. I want to turn on a video game, and that's all I do all day. And you have to come and dab the drool off me as I've gone mindless, right? So I can't pick a side. But these two, they didn't have a little bit of both. One was restless outdoorsy. The other was the chill at home kind of guy. And because of their different personalities, they come into the famed Soup Day conflict. What do I mean by that? Well, most of us know the story of the famous Soup Day. You see, Jacob, we find in this story, is making some stew. And if you study it, you find out it's lentil stew. Y'all, you may have a really good, banging recipe for lentils. And I'll take your word for that. I've tried a couple. I'm good. I'm just going to let that pass, right? But here's the thing. Esau finds that beggars can't be choosers. And Esau rolls in after being away hunting. And if you've ever done any kind of backcountry activities, hiking, backpacking, hunting, you realize that while you're out in the wild, your rations are a little bit limited at best. In fact, I went with a friend last year. He had an elk hunt in Montana, and so I went with him. Had a great time, but I found myself surviving on granola bars and these things called GOO gummies. They're little gummies made for endurance sports. They give you amino acids and basic sugars and electrolytes to help keep you going. And for all day long, I'd eat a granola bar and chew on these gummies from sun up to sundown on the side of the mountain. So needless to say, when we flew back home and we hit up a burger joint in Billings, which they only have 2 restaurants in Little Billings, but they had a burger joint and we hit it up, man. Y'all, I think that was the best burger I'd ever eaten. It was a simple airport burger. But after days of just eating camp food, and no hate toward our camp food, it was actually really good after the end of a cold day. But man, that burger was juicy and fresh, grilled, flame grilled. Man, it just hits different after being out on the mountain for a couple of days. And so here we have Esau in a very similar situation. He rolls up back home and he smells something cooking and his stomach's growling because he's been gone a while. And he finds his brother Jacob making some soup. And so let me give you a word of warning. This is not our main topic. It's just a freebie. So take it if you will. But be careful of your appetites. They're good. They point us to things we need, but they should not control us. Because when you become impulsive, you make bad decisions. And we see that happen here with Esau. Esau becomes impulsive because his stomach's growling, he's been out, he's tired, and now all he wants is some soup. And so he asks Jacob to give him some soup. And I mean, it'd be one thing if Jacob had just pulled off a fresh brisket with a good bark and smoke ring, and he was slicing into it, and you could see the juice roll. You're like, even now I'm getting hungry. I might do what Esau did for some brisket, right? But no, y'all, this is lentil soup. But he says, hey, give me some of that. And Jacob's like, okay, how about you trade me your birthright for it? And we're starting to see his scheming side, his deceitful side starting to take over. Because you see, his birthright was a major thing, not to be thrown away, because the birthright makes the firstborn the one who basically controls the family estate. When the patriarch passes, he gets the majority of the wealth. He signs the paperwork. He's the one that makes decisions for the family. And Esau, in a moment of impulse, throws that away just for some soup and bread. It's like selling your inheritance for some Panera. I have mixed feelings about Panera, but it's definitely not worth my inheritance. But Esau says, you know what? And this is his wording, what good is my birthright if I die of starvation? Sure. And what we're seeing here is in Jacob's actions is a preview of coming attractions. All right, let's jump ahead in their life. And now we find their father Isaac's nearing the end of his life. And as he has gotten older, he's lost his eyesight. He can't see as well. So as most people who have lost their eyesight, when if someone comes in, you can hear their voice, you recognize their voice, and you know them by touch. And that's going to play a role here in just a moment. But he says, okay, it's time. I need to pass on the blessing to Esau, the oldest. He said, I want to make it special. And so he said, hey, Esau, go out into the field. Kill me something from the wild country like I like. Fix it up how I like it. Serve it to me. We'll eat a meal together, and then I want to pass on a blessing to you, for my days are limited. So Esau's like, all right, I'll be back, Dad. And Esau jumps in his truck, throws his hounds in the back, and heads on out trying to find some game. Here's the thing. Words have promise, words have meaning, especially those made in faith. We've lost some significance of what blessings actually mean. We don't actually see many people praying blessings over other people with real faith intentions. But back then, they had not lost that, and so there was some significance to the event transpiring. But if you've ever done any kind of hunting, you know that it's very rare that you roll up to the stand and within the hour you're back home with your game. You know, this isn't Davidson County where you have a ladder stand somewhere and a feeder to hunt over. This is the back country. He's going to be gone a while. And so his mother, Rebecca, knows that Esau's not going to be back real soon. And so just like her son, she's a schemer, and she calls him in because, as we saw in Genesis, Jacob was her favorite. And she says, son, your brother's about to get a blessing, but I want you to have it. So I need you to follow my instructions. We're going to pull this off real fast, and then you're going to be the one that gets the blessing. So she says, hey, go find a goat from the herd. Go ahead and slaughter it. I'll cook it up. I'll put your father's favorite spices on it so he won't realize he's eating goat. He'll think he's eating wild game. And then we're going to cover your body with the goat hair. Literally, that's in the book of Genesis. That's how hairy Esau was and how hairy Jacob wasn't. He had to wear goat skin so that when his dad touched him, he's like, oh yeah, that's definitely Esau. Y'all, that's one hairy dude if you're as hairy as a goat, but that's beside the point. So she says, Jacob, do all these things. Just listen closely. Do what I tell you. And so they do it. They pull it off because Jacob was hard of seeing. He smells the goat smell. He's like, well, that's obviously Esau, been out in the wild country. He touches the goat hair. He's like, you feel like Esau. The voice isn't quite right, but everything else is telling me you're there and you got meat for me. And so he eats the dinner. He blesses Jacob. And now Jacob has received what was intended for Esau. And when Esau finds out, needless to say, he's not happy about it. And he makes a vow that when my father dies, I will kill Jacob for this. And with that in mind, Jacob's like, y'all, I can't be here anymore. And so he's like, peace out, I'm heading on. And so his mother sends him back to her family. And she says, you know what, you need a wife anyway. Why don't you leave till things cool off here at home? Go back to my relatives, find you a wife. And maybe when things cool off, you can come back. And so Jacob runs. For time's sake, we won't keep going on what happens next. Hopefully you're starting to see how Jacob is a schemer, a deceiver, basically a thief. And so this continues to play out time and time again. And on his journey to his relative's land, God reveals himself to Jacob. And this is a trend. in the patriarchs. God revealed himself to Abraham, then he revealed himself to Isaac, and now finally in Jacob's life, he's getting a revelation from God himself. And this time it's in the form of a vision and a dream. Jacob goes to sleep. And most of us are familiar with the dream, Jacob's Ladder. That's where that name comes from. Or a Stairway to Heaven. Thank you, Led Zeppelin, for helping us memorialize that into song. But we find it first here in Genesis. And he sees a stairway leading to heaven with God at the top. Most of us know that story. But I want you to see what God tells Jacob in this vision. Genesis chapter 28, starting verse 13. It says, "At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you. I am giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. What's more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised you." Seems straightforward. It's a repeat of what we've seen. First given to Abraham, then reiterated to Isaac, and now given to Jacob. And so what Jacob does next is he sets up a monument, which seems practical enough. If you have a one-on-one encounter with God himself, you're probably going to set up a monument to memorialize that time. But then Jacob makes a vow and ruins it all, because Jacob's vow shows Jacob is still Jacob. Look at it with us. Genesis chapter 28, now in verse 20. So he set up an altar, he set up a memorial, and then he says, "Then Jacob made this vow, if God will indeed be with me and protect me on this journey, and if he will provide me with food and clothing, and if I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will certainly be my God. And this memorial pillar I've set up will become a place for worshiping God. And I will present God a tenth of everything he gives me." One pastor put it this way, Jacob basically said, "God, if you'll do all the things I want you to do for me, then guess what? Do I have a deal for you? You do that and you get me," right? Jacob's like, look how great I am. God, if you'll provide for me in all these different ways, then I guess I'll worship you after that. Y'all, Jacob is a very self-focused individual. To say, if God gives me blank, then I will worship him, shows a heart focused on self, showing that God is not the God of your life. You are the God of your life. Because the reality is, God's not a genie in a lamp. God's not some holy vending machine. He's not Burger King, have it your way. It should be the opposite. Whatever he wants, we do. And this same self-serving mentality continues over and over again in Jacob's life. In fact, when he gets to his family land, he sees this pretty girl. He's like, that one, that's my wife. And her father's like, well, you know what? Okay, fine, but I'm just not going to give her to you. So why don't you work for me for 7 years? No pay. I'll help feed you and make sure you stay alive. But after 7 years, your pay will be her. He's like, you know what? Done. You know, she must be a smoke show for that. And so he's like, I'm here for it. And he does it. But the trickster gets tricked, because at the end, when he gets married, he finds out he marries her less attractive sister, Leah. No hate on Leah, just how the Bible puts it. And he's like, man, instead of just accepting, okay, well, I do that to other people, it's been done to me. No, he doubles down. Imagine being Leah. And the first 7 years of your marriage, you finally are married to somebody, you got a husband finally, and the first 7 years of y'all marriage, he's working to get another girl. Because he says, you know what, fine, that's not who I wanted, so I still want that one, so how about I work another 7 years? She has to put up with a husband who wants another woman, and the first 7 years of their life is him working to get her instead of focusing on you. Poor Leah. And so that's what he does. Because Jacob is a selfish, self-serving, me monster dude. And in the end, it's his uncle he's working for. He gets pretty miffed, because not only is he taking his daughters away, he's also shortchanging his uncle in livestock. Jacob shortchanges his uncle because he comes up with a scheme. Hey, if you do these kind of things, like, why don't I get the ones with spots and stripes and you get all the pretty ones, right? I'll take the black sheep and the stripy ones and you get the pretty ones and we'll call it a day. And his uncle's like, well, that sounds fair enough because I like the pretty ones anyway. Well, Jacob starts working some stuff going on, and more spotted ones, striped ones, black sheep are born, and less pretty ones, until finally he's got this huge herd and his uncle has hardly anything. He's miffed because he has been shortchanged out of his own livestock. And so now he's kind of ticked off his uncle, and it's time to leave. He's pushed it as far as it will go. You know what? I'm going to cash in my chips, call it a night, and go back home. And so he flees. But he's got an angry uncle behind him, and as he's going home, his brother has not forgotten the vow, and he has an angry brother ahead of him. He's caught between a rock and a hard place. And what does he do next? He continues to act selfishly. He says, you know what? Let me send some gifts over to my brothers, try to soften him up. When that doesn't seem to work, he's like, I got it. Women and children first, right? We're going to save them first in the lifeboats. Y'all go ahead, right? The dude's such a coward. He sends his wives and his children and his servants ahead of him to make sure that his brother doesn't kill them first. Y'all, he's a coward. He's a wimp. But that action leaves him by himself at camp. And it's often when we are all alone, stripped of everything that we think we need, that we most often hear God's voice. And it's the same with Jacob. And so in the middle of the night, all alone, he gets into a wrestling match, UFC style, with some unknown dude. In fact, it's crazier than a UFC because they go like five-minute rounds, I think is what it is. And they fight all night. They wrestle all night long, no one making any progress. Scholars note that this is what is often referred to as a Christophany, just a fancy way of saying the pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus in the flesh. This is Jesus taking flesh before the virgin birth we see in the Gospels. So it's a temporary existence of Jesus in the flesh. And so Jacob and the Lord wrestle for a while, and we know it's God because of what happens next. And as dawn begins to break, the Lord looks at Jacob and says, "What's your name? What's your name?" God didn't need to know Jacob's name, but he wanted to hear it out loud. Jacob needed to hear his name because his name means deceiver, heel grabber. So Jacob says his name. And now look at Genesis 32, verse 28. God gives Jacob a new name. It says, your name will no longer be Jacob. Your name will no longer be deceiver, schemer, heel grabber, the man told him. From now on, you will be called Israel because you have fought with God and with men and have won. The nation of Israel. I wonder where that comes from. Here it is. And in this moment is where you start to see a shift in Jacob's nature and his character, because as his life plays out from this fulcrum point, we see him being different. No longer does he live up to the name deceiver, but instead he lives out the promised name of Israel. And in all of this, what I want you to see is that no one, no matter what you've done, no matter how selfish you've been, no one is too far gone for God to use you. You see, Jacob has a colorful history full of lies, schemes, and selfishness to the point it has cost a lot of those who are closest to him. But now he's no longer known as Jacob, he's known as Israel. And from then on, we see that his life shifts to be a life that serves God instead. In fact, if you trace his story through Genesis, you'll see that at one point, God asks him, he gives him command to move, and Jacob wants to be pleasing to God. And so his family, his wives, and his servants, they have idols in their camp. And he says, you know what? No more. We're not doing this. He says, God has asked us to do something, and we're going to follow him. He said, I want everybody in my household to give me your idols and purify yourself. And they did. And he took those idols and he buried them. And no more were they a part of his household, because he decided he was going to serve God from then on out. And so Jacob ends his life as a man of faith, serving the same God that his father and grandfather served, doing the same thing, being a man of faith. No longer is he the same scheming, selfish person, because he has had a changed heart. Now, as we've walked through these stories week after week in the Hall of Faith, maybe you've thought to yourself, that's good and well for them, but there's no way I could ever be in that category. There's no way God could use me, because you believe that your past excludes you from his future. Let me say that again. You believe the lie that your past has excluded you from his future. But this is where faith plays a vital role, church. You have to ask yourself, do I believe that God will keep his promises? If that is true, that you do believe God will keep his promises, then you can't believe the lie, you're too far gone, because it won't reckon with these verses. Look at Lamentations 3. Lamentations 3, starting verse 21, says, "Yet I still dare to hope when I remember this. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies are afresh each morning. I say to myself, the Lord is my inheritance. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who depend on him, to those who search for him." Jesus reiterates this in a parable, the parable of the prodigal son. If you remember, the son, being selfish, decides, I want my money. It's my money. I want it now. He watched too many J.G. Wentworth commercials. And so he took his inheritance and left his family in an act of brazen selfishness. And guess what? Does what any young man with too much money does. He blows it all. And when life gets hard, which it always does, and when his resources have run out, which it did, he realizes, I made a mistake. But he believes, I'm no longer worthy to be called my father's son. I can't be given that honor anymore because of what I have done. But I know this, that my father has servants, he has workers he's hired, and at least they have better lives than me. So maybe I can just send in my resume to dad, ask for forgiveness, and just work for him, because at least it's better than where I am now. And so he goes home in humility to ask for forgiveness, to seek redemption. And Jesus says, this is what happens next, Luke 15:20. So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. You see, the father had every right to scorn his son. He blew his inheritance. He demanded, God, he said, Dad, you're not even dead yet, but I want that money you have that I will get when you die. So give it to me now. And then he left his family behind to do his own thing. The father had every right to scorn his son. And he didn't even have an obligation to give him a job as a servant. But what we see is instead the father offers mercy. He embraces him. He kisses him. He cleans him up. He puts on new clothing on him. And he gives him a signet ring, a ring that shows that he is the son of the father, because that's the family seal. And I know that's a story, but it is an illustration for the Father, God the Father. That's why Jesus gave it to us. Because no matter where you find yourself in this life, what I tell you is that it is not too late if you're still drawing breath. It is still an opportunity for you if you still draw breath. Because when Jesus was John 3:16, but he followed it up with John 3:17, where he told Nicodemus, I came not to this world to condemn it, but rather save it. You see, faith, like Jacob, faith gives us the key to open up the gift of God's forgiveness. Faith tells us that he is great and great is his faithfulness, that he is a God of mercy, that he can use the broken. In fact, he prefers the broken over the one who has it all together. When Jesus was approached with the woman caught in the act of adultery, what did he say to her? He said, neither do I condemn you. That's why earlier in our study through Hebrews, we had to wrestle with this idea of, can someone be too far gone? Hebrew calls them the ones that are impossible to come back to repentance, because they're the ones who have heard the call of the Father and chose to double down on their rejection. And in the end, the Bible is clear. In fact, I think we're going to see it in Hebrews, but it does say this: it is appointed from all men to die once, and after that is the judgment. For good or for bad, you will be judged. So when you draw your last breath, when you enter eternity, then it's pencils down, turn your test in. That's when it's too late. But not before that. Not before that. Jacob was broken. In fact, in his wrestling with God, God touched his hip, just a single touch, knocked his hip out of socket so that he had a limp the rest of his life. It was a physical breaking to mirror the spiritual breaking that happened to him. God gave him that limp as a forever memorial to that night where they wrestled. But see, Jacob came to terms with who God was and was forever changed by that. And so today, if you feel, I'm too far gone, I've done too much, I tell you, you are not. Because it doesn't matter what you've done, where you've done it, who you've been with. Basically, the reality is this: we're all broken. All of us. Nobody's excluded from that. We're all wretched, sinful creatures, myself included. I'm no better than anybody here today. No better. But look what Ephesians tells us in Ephesians 2, 4, and 5. But God is so rich in mercy, and He loved us so much that even though we were dead because of our sins, He gave us life when He raised Christ from the dead. It is only by God's grace that you have been saved. But the question is, will you accept His grace and mercy, or will you still believe the lie that you're too far gone and walk away? One last thought, though, before we close. Don't get it twisted. This is not a sermon to condone your sin either, because the Father calls now for repentance. To believe the lie that you still have time, that I can live my life however I want to, and then after a while make a decision. I'll do that later. I'll follow Christ later. Y'all, that is a lie from the pit of hell meant to keep you away from salvation. Because the reality is none of us was promised tomorrow. We covered this verse, these two verses earlier in our book study in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 3, starting in verse 12. Be careful. Hey, take warning. Be careful then, dear brothers and sisters. Make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. You must warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God. Did you notice that? Why it's still called today? That's what we're doing today. This is a day of warning. Hey, yeah, you're not too far gone. It's not too late yet. But why would you wait? Because that's a dangerous game to play. I would rather risk my life in any other physical act of danger. I'd rather risk my life in that than risk my soul. Because a physical death, it's a once and done. But eternal damnation lasts forever. But let me end with this. Let's bring it back to faith. We saw Jacob release control of his life. Instead of trying to work his way to make it for his benefit, he released control to God and started following Him. And so I ask you, do you have faith in God? Do you have faith in God? If so, what you'll find is as you lean into that faith, you'll find that what He provides is indeed the best. That His will that you follow is the best. That His plan is the best. That His blessings are the best. And here's the crazy part. It doesn't often seem that way, especially to other people. But the Bible tells us the things of God are foolishness to the unrighteous. So even if it doesn't make sense to our human minds, faith says, hey, let me link you to God. Let me link you to His goodness. And let me show you that following Him is worth everything and then some. See, in the end, Jacob chose to give up control and put his full faith in God. And when he did, he was changed so that when the time came for him to pass on the blessings, he was able to do so. In fact, his son Joseph said, will you not just bless us, your children, but will you bless my sons, your grandchildren as well? And in faith, Jacob does just that. Just as Abraham did to Isaac, and Isaac did with his son. In just a moment, I'm going to pray, and after that, we're going to have a time of offering. Typically, we have soft music, and it's a time of reflection. We do that so that you have the opportunity to ponder over, what is the Spirit speaking to me today? What is it that from today that I need to learn, that I need to apply? So I ask that you take that time, reflect on what you've heard the Spirit speak to you, and take it as an opportunity to be obedient, to follow God's instructions, and to give. Because that's an act of faith. It's a worship through faith when you give to God. And so that's why we do it. So as the baskets pass, we give you that opportunity as well. Let's pray. Oh, gracious Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you that none of us are too far gone. That no matter what we've done, no matter where we've been, no matter who we did it to, that in your mercy and kindness, you still offer forgiveness. and give us a chance to be made new. God, for some of us, we're Christ followers, but we did some dumb things in ourself, in our flesh, and God, that doesn't exclude us. We don't get benched. We just need to come back to you and say, I messed up. Will you forgive me? And you've promised that. In John, you told us, in 1 John, that if we confess our sins, you are faithful and just to forgive us of those sins and to go on beyond that and cleanse us of all unrighteousness. And so, God, for each of us today, we come to you in humility to say, we have messed up. Here's how. As David prayed, God, here are my known sins, but I also ask for forgiveness for those I'm not aware of. Because the reality is, we sin. It's inevitable. We don't have to, but we do. So, God, we present them to you and ask for forgiveness. God, if anybody here has not made a decision of faith, don't let them believe the lie that one, they have time, or two, they're too far gone. Neither one of those are true. You've shown us in your word time and time again that all one has to do is ask to receive your Son as Lord of our lives, to surrender control to you, truly surrender, and then we'll be given a new name, a new heart, and we will be made clean. And so, God, we thank you for that promise, and we thank you for your word that shows that to us. And we thank you for your Son, because without his sacrifice, his death, his burial, and then his resurrection, none of that would be possible anyway. So ultimately, God, we thank you for him. And it's in his precious and holy name that we pray. Amen.